Guys, when we get viewed on this podcast, we're going to be accused of being male, pale, straight, and stale.
Before I was successful in my career, I was still white and straight and male, but I also was poor. And I also worked, and I did this in each chapter of the book. I had teenage jobs that helped build character, and then my dad died when I was 20, and I had no money and no mentoring and no connection to any sort of economic activity or opportunity. And work was the outlet by which God brought me into a more fulfilling and flourishing life.
So I'd like for you to spend a few minutes talking about how you see that in identity and how our vocation really is critical to who I am as a person.
Hello, folks. Dennis Allen with the Disciple Dilemma along with Raymond Monroe. If you are looking for the recipe for a couch potato, stay away from this episode. We've got Dave Bahnsen with us. David Bahnsen is the founder and managing partner of the Bahnsen Group, based in California, offices in New York. You've seen him on CNBC and Fox if you watch any of those financial programs. And he's got a new book, Full-Time Work and the Meaning of Life. We're going to talk to Dave about financial markets, but more importantly, we're going to talk to him about work, what that means for a disciple. This is a great episode. We're excited about it. So off we go with part one of Full-Time Disciple, Full-Time Work.
I actually got the book on Tuesday night and read it before I went to bed. It's really extraordinarily good. It really is extraordinarily good. Most books made for ordinary Christians to be accessible have a lot of stories, and it's not always clear what those stories have to do with moving the argument forward. Could you give us a little bit of your background and how you ended up as a celebrity on Fox News talking about finance and writing a book about being a Christian in the workplace?
Well, I can definitely talk about how I came to be in finance and how I came to write about things from a Christian perspective. But I'll have to leave you in suspense on me being a celebrity on Fox News. We'll wait for those things to materialize. I do appear as a guest frequently on Fox Business and Fox News and CNBC, but I think my non-celebrity status is embedded in my being a guest. The anchors have far more entertainment value, and as they say, I have a face for podcasting. Those terms and concepts you talk about that it sounds like you have an appreciation for, and I do, that my father really taught me about. I think you're right that they're largely foreign to today's church. Not entirely. There's been a much bigger embrace of the deeper end of the pool in Neo-Calvinist thought, in Kuyperian thought, and in Evangelion presuppositional apologetics, all these sort of fancy terms that are out there. I think there's far more people that have embraced curiosity, a spiritual and intellectual curiosity about some of these things in the last 20 years than there were in the 20 and 30 before that. But we are still, as a church, living in the aftermath of a full century of pietism, of anti-intellectualism, and unfortunately of a low view of work, a low view of cultural engagement that I think comes with all of that. So how did I get to be in the career and way of thinking that I am? It's because I was raised by Greg Bahnsen. That's it. My father was a devout believer in loving God with all of your mind. And he asked me to do the same. And I've tried my best to take that very seriously. But there's a lot of great Christian theologians and philosophers and scholars that take that seriously. But that path was not for me. And my father very much encouraged me pursuing something that would lead to a successful business life. And yet I don't view those things as bifurcated. I believe we need more executives, financiers, entrepreneurs, people of all different components of the labor force and of the marketplace that are committed to a deeper level of Christian thinking.
You know, one of the things that you've mentioned lately that I really was delighted by, and something that I'd like for you to explore with me a little bit, is the notion that you need to be transparent as a Christian in the workplace about how your values and your Christianity affects the way you do your business. And I would see that as a fundamental concept of discipleship. But discipleship in many churches is about Bible study and evangelism. It's not about how we live our life. So how do you reconcile, understand yourself as a disciple in the workplace? What's the role of discipling within the workplace?
Well, there's two things. I don't believe one can disciple others without themselves being discipled. And so there is a sense in which people have to build the necessary components of being a disciple of Christ in order to help lead others to be a disciple of Christ. And then I also believe that there is a very important, I don't want to say nuance, but I do believe that there are particulars here that will be relevant in each individual situation. And what I mean by that is high-level principles that are universal: integrity, witness, lack of compromise, boldness. There's certain components that we can't ever put aside. But then the application of those things may look different in certain contexts. And the reason I know that's the case is Jesus said so. He said that we should be wise as serpents, gentle as doves. There's a component in which we have to think through these things. And I think the whole book of Proverbs is sort of this big commandment of how we go about seeking discernment and wisdom in various situations. And so I think there is an entirely different path for how one goes about bringing their faith into the marketplace in different situations, different risk profiles, different occupations, and also positions of leadership. But I just want to get back to the basic macro answer I have to your question. The part that I feel most strongly about is the lowest hanging fruit is the notion of excellence. There are some people that have a sensitivity to what can be said and not said in a work environment. Others, like myself, who don't. I'm not going to fire myself, and I'm economically secure. And I'm very blessed to not have the vulnerabilities, but I recognize that a lot of people do. And I don't like going around telling people that they should put a kick me sign on themselves when they walk into an HR meeting and risk some of those career sensitivities. It's easy for me to say because it doesn't apply to me. But in reality, the part that does apply to everybody is the burden of excellence. If we are to claim Christ in the workplace, then we have to do things as he asked us to do them. And that is with an uncompromising spirit of excellence, of proficiency, of productivity. And I know that there's a lot of work to be done in this field, because I still don't have phone calls of people saying, I need to know the local churches in this area so I can call and hire all of their workers, all their people, all their members. I want to come fill the jobs at my company. That to me should be the standard. That's what we ought to be aspiring to as a church, that we're first in line, not last in line.
When you cut the grass, that has eternal significance, and God is pleased with you in and of itself. It's not instrumental or transactional. I don't do it just to impress my neighbors and show them I'm a good person. And I don't do it just to keep the value of my property up. God is pleased in and of itself, and I feel joy when I complete that. And you seem to be on that same page in the book, that work is not instrumental or transactional. It's about my identity.
Well, it's my favorite topic, and I love the way that you've worded some of it. And obviously, these are sentiments that are really the point of the book. I mean, the transactional vision of work, which has largely been captured in our pulpits. I use the term Great Commission utilitarianism, that basically they view work as some form of utilitarian benefit that it might be attached to a spiritual sounding theme. So work is effective because it enables you to get the money to support your family, to support your church, to support the building fund. You may build status that helps you to get onto a nonprofit so you can go work at a ministry. There's always some angle around what it is intended to do instrumentally, transactionally, and never inherently. The inherent benefit of creating with God as a sub-creator, a co-creator. There's theological context there I'm happy to get into, but my point being the inherent benefit of the cultural mandate, of what God actually put us on earth to do, to steward the earth, to cultivate it, and to build a civilization. And so I do not view most of the things that we do in our jobs as beneficial when the paycheck comes and the tithe goes out from the paycheck. I view it as beneficial the moment that the work is being done and goods and services are being produced that meet the needs and wants of humanity. And I view this from both the subjective and objective angle, that God himself cares about the work and God himself cares about the worker, who is the subject of the work, who he created in his image with dignity and gave him the shared attribute with God of being a producer, innovator, and creator. And then, of course, the object of the work. We care about the people that we serve in our work. I do not think most Christians think intentionally about the subjective and objective nature of work, let alone the inherent benefit and dignity. And part of the reason is that we all have gotten into a mode in a market economy. We have the blessing of not having to think about it. We take it for granted.
Now, you've had a couple of things in your book that you were really good at being even-handed on, but you're going to get blamed for anyway. And one of the ones is one that Dennis brought up. You're on the East Coast and West Coast, so I'll let him ask the question. Go ahead, Dennis.
I thought I was supposed to just be the eye candy on this thing. David, congratulations on the book, getting full-time work to the street. Here's the way I would set this up. I can almost hear the comments coming in on this after the podcast hits the air. You got two dark-hearted guys. One guy's a private equity turnaround guy. The other guy's an investment bank guy in the wealth management business. And then we got this industrialist in the middle of this whole thing. You started out in your introduction with this phrase, which I think is really interesting, that work is the meaning of life. Now, would you just kind of unpack that for us from a perspective of, are the people with the Westminster Shorter Catechism going to get really upset about what you just said? Is Ron Sider with, Rich Christensen and Adrian Hunter going to get upset? And is the single mom going to get upset? Kind of those three views, right? High theology, progressive theology, and poverty. How would they take that phrase, and how do you want them to take it?
Well, it's a very fair question, and I'm excited to be able to answer it whenever it does come up, because one of the things I believe I do by saying it in the introduction is I put the burden on me to go on and establish it throughout the rest of the book. And chapter 3 to me is where, after spending the first couple chapters trying to set the table for the need of the discussion, for the burden that we face that has necessitated this conversation, sociologically, culturally, economically, I establish my rationale for work being the meaning of life from the Garden of Eden, and decided that creational theology and a full exegesis of Genesis chapter 1 leads us to the inescapable conclusion that God created us for the purpose of work. Now, I also am very careful to point out that this gets to your third category, the labor, I love the word output. There are scenarios by which that is compensable output, and that is the vast majority of us, that in a market economy, there is a value to the productive output we generate, and so we get compensated for it. In a domestic situation, There is not usually very good compensation for being a mommy and a daddy, and yet there is a lot of output that goes into that. The notion that work is the meaning of life is a reference to the productive energies we exert as a byproduct of our cultural mandate, our position as the very good 6-day creation product. The Ron Sider category is a sort of separate matter in that I don't believe the progressive evangelical audience, it has to necessarily critique my view of work, but they do critique the macro conditions in which I think work is most optimized, namely a market economy, a free society where there is price discovery and where there is supply and demand and where there is decentralization and largely the removal of impediments such as central planning and burdensome state intervention. The progressive evangelicals may want the loving hand of the state involved on the scale of trying to create certain economic outcomes. And I would vehemently disagree, and I will dedicate decades more of my life to fighting against that. But I don't think it is necessarily in contradiction to my belief that we were made to work. Now, where I expect, and not so much the Ron Sider camp or the housewife, where I expect the most pushback is on people that will say we are to work as a commandment, but we were not made to work. It is not our identity. Our identity is in Christ. And our identity being in Christ, our primary responsibility is to be a husband or wife, a father or mother. And that I vehemently disagree with. I think our identity is found in Christ, and what that means involves various hats that we are to wear often at once. I do not take off my hat of being a financial professional when I go home. I do not take off my hat of being a father and a husband when I come to the office. There's a lot of mysteries and a lot of controversies that I am keenly aware as to what the source of the tension is. This is just simply not one of them. I do not understand what is so difficult about recognizing that in God making us individually with dignity, it is a totality of 100% of the humans he created who he made in his image. He did not make 50% in his image and 50% as sort of a sub-human category. All of us share the attributes of our Creator who was productive, creative, and innovative. All of us are tasked with the mandate of being productive in the kingdom. Some of us will command a high market premium for compensation based on supply and demand, skill, subjective theory of subjective value, the various components that drive market response. Some will not have the same market price or market value. None of that changes the underlying point you're referencing in the introduction, that for us to deny that our work is a major part of our identity, we have to assert something that nobody is willing to assert, and for good reason, because it is preposterous. And that is that what we do has nothing to do with who we are. But who believes that? If I say, here's a person working 18 hours a day, sacrificing, excelling, competing, driving value, creating wealth, employing people, and here's this other guy who's laying on the couch smoking pot all day and doesn't do anything. Are we going to sit and pretend we think it's the same thing?
How do we communicate to the broad, to the young people that are looking for meaning and purpose in life, that their job, their vocational calling, all their vocational callings, whether it's family or work or whatever, but certainly their primary vocational calling is a calling from God, and that God's pleased with them? How do we communicate that? Because we're not doing it now.
I think that the first step often to solving a problem is admitting you have one. And that one of the tremendous low-hanging fruits in this task you've described is for us to stop talking about our jobs. And I'm referring to pastors in the pulpit, clergy, those in a position of ecclesiastical or spiritual authority, to stop talking about their jobs, people's jobs, their congregants' work, as if it is inferior to this ethereal category of ministry. In other words, we do what you want to do. Start talking to young people with the right language and the right message about this topic when we stop talking like dualists. And that's a huge portion of what the book is devoted to. Now, sometimes dualism is explicit and it is stated. The word Gnosticism is thrown out a lot, and that's a deep word and a complicated word. Other times we don't even fancy it up. They just will say very cute cliches that have an awful lot of dualism embedded in them. And candidly, that's what the title of my book was about. It was a response to what I believe to be latent dualism in the message of halftime, moving from success to significance, which was chapter 8 of my book. Bob Buford's book has sold about 1 million copies. It's been used as a sort of small group study or Bible study book for thousands of churches. And it uses language that implies if half of your life is in a success phase and we want to then move in the second half of your life to significant phase, how does a young person interpret the clear English of that language as any other way than dualist, of implying that there is a sacred that is superior to a secular and that there is a two-tier value in God's kingdom? The way we talk to young people about work is not that way.
Well, I wanted to ask David this. Guys, when we get viewed on this podcast, we're going to be accused of being male, pale, straight, and stale. Okay, that's kind of the category we're going to get thrown at. However, I would like for David to say something which, if we could be seen in a gentle, noble reception as a believer listening to what we've got to say. David, the single mom who's working at McDonald's has a wonderful, noble call in Christ. Would you talk to your book to the mom who's flipping burgers at McDonald's right now and tell her why it matters that she is who she is?
Yeah, because God believes that who she is matters, that God made the delivery of goods and services to a community to matter, and that's what she is doing. And when we refer to it as flipping burgers, there is a societal stigma that may be pejorative or demeaning, but there is not a heavenly pejorative. That's something we have added. It's an externality. What it is, now again, if she's struggling to get ahead, if she has to balance the challenge of raising kids on her own and has a difficult job, there is a complexity that is involving other circumstances than just her work. There's a social, a cultural, a family, economic environment, and I have all sorts of macro opinions on those things. But what you're asking me about the book requires micro advice. What do I say to Jenny in that particular situation? What are her options? What does her dating life look like? What is her connection at the church? And in the meantime, what does the value of that work mean? Can she take night classes? Does she want to do that forever? Does she want to do something different? In the micro, there are individual situations that are very pertinent where there can be wisdom, advancement, and no matter what, contentment in that situation, because nobody is paying her to not deliver goods and services. That's the value that is serving her community. And by the way, to do so in a way sometimes that you can meet the needs of your neighbor that you've never even met. Somebody working on an assembly line and they go home feeling like it's a meaningless job, but they didn't just do a nice thing for Bob and Tom and Jenny in their neighborhood. They're doing a nice thing for people on the other side of the world they're never going to see because of the miracle of work, because of this productive capacity for how a more sophisticated, advanced market economy works. The message here is not merely, I cannot help the fact that I think I'm 4 of the 5 things you accused me of. I'm definitely straight, and I'm definitely male and pale. And I don't know what the other couple were, but
Stale. Stale.
stale. That one, well, I guess is more subjective. But what I can say is that for all who are not in those various categories of race and gender and class, that mine is a message about truth, beauty, and goodness, and it transcends race, gender, and class. And before I was successful in my career, I was still white and straight and male, but I also was poor. And I also worked, and I did this in each chapter of the book. I had teenage jobs that helped build character. And then my dad died when I was 20, and I had no money and no mentoring and no connection to any sort of economic activity or opportunity. And work was the outlet by which God brought me into a more fulfilling and flourishing life. I cannot act as if this was a story for me, but others are going to have to just continue to grin and bear it. I believe everybody can find contentment in their work because I believe that was God's design for his creation.
David, would you give us a frame here on how we reach out to you? DC Today is one of those I want to talk about, but also how we get the book and how we kind of creep your social world.
Yeah, the easiest way for people to be able to find me related to the book, fulltimebook.com. Fulltimebook.com. It's an easy web address to remember, and it has all kinds of clips and interviews and content and excerpts from the book, and then of course can drive people to other outlets. You know, my full website, podcast, all of those things. But I would recommend people to go to fulltimebook.com. It's the easiest URL to be able to say. That's the problem with the last name Bahnsen that isn't actually spelled like the last name Johnson is even though Bahnsen.com is where I house all of my stuff, you have to spell the last name for everybody. It's so inconvenient.
So you're seeing all this on the screen right now, folks, as we're going through. And also, David, how about a plug just for this idea of DC Today, because then we get to see you in your vocational shell.
Yeah, so dividendcafe.com, we do it. He's referring to the DC Today as a daily market summary, commentary, economic digestion, and then every Friday is a macroeconomic commentary, and dividendcafe.com. I've been writing it every single Friday since Lehman Brothers went bankrupt in 2008. And that is a wonderful way to stay in touch. Here are different thoughts about the economy, about capital markets, even daily public policy and so forth. So that is my life's calling, my friend.
Yeah, and one other thing, you clearly care deeply about propagating the Christian faith and grappling with the full-time work and our calling before God, and started a podcast, On the Hook. How do I find On the Hook?
And so On the Hook was a mini podcast series we did, and all 5 episodes are up and live. And so the On the Hook podcast, you'll also see it at fulltimebook.com. But I'll tell you a little secret. There are 2 bonus episodes that will be coming out soon enough. And then there will end up being a final, for those who are familiar with my late father, we're in production now on the final episode, which will be the 8th one, the 3rd bonus episode, where I will be going through and doing a talk on Greg Bahnsen and a theology of work, and interweaving a lot of excerpts of his sermons and teachings on the subject. So there will be actual audio clips from the far smarter Bahnsen on this subject. So I'm really excited about that one.
Would you help the church think more about discipleship? Would you help us get the conversation started to talk about the biblical discipleship Jesus gave us? Please follow us. Our website, www.thediscipledilemma.com. You can find us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and all the RSS feeds. If you'd follow or like us, you'll help us get leverage in the digital marketplace to talk about the fact that discipleship needs to be talked about. And as always, folks, thanks for listening.